Your apartment is way bigger. You should swap with us, I'm having a baby. Sloane blurted out, dabbing the corners of her mouth with a cloth napkin. 64-year-old Vivian Gallagher paused her knife over the roast chicken. The dining room of her home was bathed in the warm, golden hour light, the very same light that poured through the massive windows she paid $3,500 a month for. This place was her sanctuary in the heart of Seattle. A space she had painstakingly put together after her husband passed away, where every piece of furniture and potted plant had its exact, rightful place. Across the table, her son, Spencer, kept his eyes glued to his plate, aggressively pushing his mashed potatoes around without daring to look her in the eye. Sloane, however, kept her chin high. She stroked her 4-month baby bump with one hand, fully expecting an answer to a decision she had already made in her own head. Our place is a literal shoebox, her daughter-in-law continued, taking a sip of water. We can barely fit a crib next to our bed. You live here all by yourself. Vivian, you have 3 bedrooms. It makes 0 sense for you to waste all this space while your grandson is born into a cramped closet. Vivian gently rested her silverware on her plate. There was no gasping, no yelling. She simply looked at the couple sitting across from her. She knew Spencer and Sloane's apartment well, a dark, dingy, damp unit. They were lucky enough to snag for $900 a month thanks to an ancient rent control lease. It's just basic logic. Mom, Spencer finally chimed in, rubbing the back of his neck. Sloane is super stressed out about the lack of space. We need this place. You'd be a lot more comfortable in something smaller anyway, without so much square footage to clean. The sheer casualness in her son's voice, the absolute assumption that his mother would just pack up her entire life for their convenience, made the air in the room run thick. Vivian picked up her wine glass, took a small sip, and let the flavor linger before making a single sound. No, was the only word that left her lips, clear and unyielding. Sloane blinked, completely thrown off, as if the language Vivian had just spoken was entirely foreign to her. Sunday dinner had just come to an abrupt end, long before dessert. The silence in the dining room stretched out. Sloane let out a dry, nervous laugh, shifting in her chair. I don't think you're getting it. Vivian, we aren't asking you to just give us the apartment for free. We'd just do a clean swap. We move in here, and you take our place. Vivian folded her hands on the table, resting her chin lightly on them. Oh, I understood you perfectly. Sloane. What you conveniently left out of your little pitch is the rent. You two pay $900. This place costs $3,500. Spencer cleared his throat, pushing his empty plate aside. Well, Mom, you've got your savings and your retirement fund. We're living paycheck to paycheck. The fair thing to do would be for everyone to just keep paying what they pay now. You keep covering the rent here, and we'll pay the $900 for our old place so you can live there. It's for the baby. The pure audacity of the proposal hung heavy in the air. They wanted her $3,500 a month home for $900, while she would be banished to a tiny, run-down unit, practically subsidizing her son's lifestyle. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a daylight robbery dressed up as family bonding. Sloane let her eyes well up with tears, a neat little trick that usually worked wonders on her husband. I thought you actually cared about your grandson. I thought you'd be one of those grandmothers who would do anything for her family. But I guess your own comfort is more important. Vivian didn't feel the sudden pang of guilt they were banking on. She had spent her entire adult life compromising, first catering to her late husband's demands, then to her children's. But those days were over. She stood up calmly and began clearing the plates. "There's pie in the fridge if you want to take some home," she announced, walking toward the kitchen. But the answer is no. My home is not up for negotiation. Spencer stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. "You are unbelievable, Mom. So incredibly selfish." 5 minutes later, the front door slammed shut. Vivian stood alone in her kitchen, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. She washed the dishes methodically. She knew this wouldn't end with a simple temper tantrum. Spencer had a spare key. Monday morning. Vivian didn't sit around waiting for the inevitable barrage of passive-aggressive texts. She was up at 7 a.m., brewed her black coffee, and opened her planner. Instead of calling her daughter Tessa to vent or cry about her son's behavior, she dialed a local business number. By exactly 9 a.m., a locksmith was unscrewing the deadbolt on her front door. Vivian watched the old hardware drop into the workman's toolbox. She paid him in cash, took 3 copies of the new keys, dropped one in her purse, hid another in a secret drawer, and slid the third onto her main keychain. The heavy, fresh metal in her hand brought her a profound sense of peace. She took the elevator down to the building's lobby, a quiet space lined with marble floors. She walked over to the front desk to see the doorman, who had worked there for years. "Morning. Frank, I just wanted to let you know that, effective immediately, my son Spencer is no longer authorized to come up to my unit unless I personally come down to get him." Frank nodded, jotting it down in his logbook without batting an eye. Vivian didn't offer any dramatic backstory about family feuds or pregnant daughters-in-law. She kept her privacy completely intact. Her home was her fortress, and the drawbridge had officially been pulled up on unannounced visitors. When she got back upstairs, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sloane. She had sent a link to a Pinterest board titled "Baby's Nursery at Grandma's House," stuffed with pins of high-end wooden cribs and pastel-painted walls, meticulously curated to fit the exact dimensions of Vivian's guest bedroom. Vivian didn't reply. She locked her phone screen and walked into her home office, booting up her laptop. If they wanted to talk about finances and the redistribution of resources, it was high time she did a full audit. There were certain financial leaks she had tolerated out of sheer habit, but that habit had been broken the night before. Staring at the screen, Vivian combed through her credit card statements. Right there, month after month, were the invisible little subsidies that were keeping Spencer and Sloane's heads above water. Spencer's auto insurance policy, Sloane's trendy, high-end gym membership, 3 different premium streaming services. They were all small, lingering charges Vivian had absorbed years ago when Spencer was between jobs, and she had simply never gotten around to canceling them. With a few clicks and a couple of quick phone calls to her bank, every single one of those recurring charges was revoked. She didn't send a warning text. She didn't deliver a self-righteous speech about financial independence. If they were grown enough to demand a luxury apartment, they were grown enough to foot their own bills. Later that afternoon, her daughter Tessa dropped by. Tessa was fiercely independent, working long hours as an architect, and never asked for a dime more than she needed. She kicked off her shoes, curled up on the sofa, and gladly accepted a mug of tea. "Spencer called me throwing a massive fit about an hour ago," Tessa said, blowing on her hot tea. "Said his card got declined at Whole Foods and that you cut off all their accounts. He begged me to talk some sense into you about the apartment." Vivian smiled, fluffing a throw pillow. "And what did you tell him?" "That I design buildings for a living. I don't manage the temper tantrums of 30-year-old men," her daughter replied with a shrug. "You did the right thing. Mom, Sloane has been bragging to her friends for months that she was moving to this neighborhood. They basically already considered your place theirs." Vivian nodded. She didn't feel heartbroken. She just felt utter clarity. She had spent years padding her son's falls, thinking she was helping him grow. In reality, she had just been feeding a bottomless sense of entitlement. "They're going to try something else," Tessa warned before heading out. "Sloane is like a dog with a bone. Let them try," Vivian replied, locking her new deadbolt as Tessa left. The lock gave a solid, definitive click. She was ready. Thursday morning, Vivian was out on her balcony, peacefully watering her orchids. She was soaking in the quiet morning, save for the distant hum of city traffic below. That's when a flash of bright orange down on the street caught her eye. A small U-Haul truck was double-parked right in front of her building. Vivian squinted. Spencer and a buddy of his hopped out of the cab. A second later, Sloane climbed out of the passenger side, pointing up at Vivian's floor with a clipboard in her hand. They started pulling flat, empty cardboard boxes and packing tape out of the back. Vivian's heart beat a little faster, but her breathing stayed completely steady. She figured out their playbook instantly. They knew she always went to her pottery class on Thursdays from 10 to noon. They had banked on using the old spare key to get inside, pack up her most valuable stuff, and start clearing the place out, backing her into a corner with a done deal. She watched from above as Spencer argued briefly with Frank at the front door. Frank shook his head, tapping his logbook. Spencer looked pissed. But the second a neighbor walked out, he and his buddy slipped through the door with their boxes, totally blowing past the front desk. Vivian set her watering can down on the patio table. She walked into her entryway, crossed her arms, and stood squarely in front of the closed front door. A couple of minutes later, she heard the metallic jingling in the hallway. The old key slid into the lock. Spencer tried to turn it. It wouldn't budge. He tried again, jiggling the handle and throwing his shoulder into the wood, grunting in confusion. "I told you to bring the right key!" Sloane's shrill whisper hissed through the door. "This is the right key. I've used it 1,000,000 times." Spencer shot back, forcing the metal until it practically ground against the pins. Vivian didn't crack a smile. She simply reached out, grasped the deadbolt lock from the inside, and, in one fluid motion, flipped it and threw the door wide open. Spencer practically stumbled forward as the door gave way. Sloane froze dead in her tracks in the hallway, clutching a flattened moving box to her chest. Spencer's buddy took a huge, awkward step backward, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Mom," Spencer stammered, all the color draining from his face. I thought you were at your class." "I canceled," Vivian said casually, firmly planting her feet in the doorframe, physically blocking them from entering. "What exactly are you doing with a U-Haul and packing supplies outside my home?" Sloane recovered quickly, trying to pivot the narrative on the fly. She furrowed her brow and took a step forward, trying to subtly push her way inside. "We came to help you pack." "Vivian, we already talked about this. We're doing you a massive favor by getting the heavy lifting out of the way. We figured we'd start with the living room chairs and the hallway console." Spencer's friend tried to awkwardly squeeze past Vivian to grab a reading chair sitting just inside the hallway. Vivian threw up a hand, stopping him dead in his tracks with a glare so icy the young man immediately backed away. "Nobody is laying a finger on my furniture," Vivian said, her voice low but vibrating with absolute authority. "And nobody is crossing this threshold." "Mom, seriously, come on!" Spencer yelled, his voice cracking with frustration. "We already paid for the truck. Sloane needs the room. You can't just be this stubborn. We're taking the stuff." They tried to push forward together, using the cardboard boxes as a makeshift shield. Vivian didn't give an inch. She reached into her cardigan pocket, pulled out her smartphone, dialed 3 digits, and put it on speaker. "I just dialed 911, she announced, holding the phone up for them to see. "If you take one more step onto my property, I am reporting you for trespassing and attempted burglary." The hallway went dead silent. The cold, mechanical ringtone echoed from the phone speaker. It was very, very real. Sloane's jaw dropped. "You're insane! We're your family!" "Get out!" Vivian commanded. Spencer's buddy dropped his box and practically sprinted for the elevator. Spencer stared at his mother, searching for a bluff, but found absolutely zero hesitation in her eyes. He grabbed Sloane by the elbow and dragged her backward. Vivian slammed the door right in their faces, ending the call before dispatch picked up. She didn't actually need the cops. She just needed them to get the message. By late afternoon, Vivian's phone was vibrating off the hook. The family group chat was lighting up her screen every 3 seconds. Sloane was writing absolute essays. She ranted about the trauma of being thrown out onto the street by her mother-in-law, openly accused Vivian of endangering her pregnancy by causing her so much stress, and uploaded dramatic photos of the empty U-Haul truck as if it were hard evidence of a war crime. A few distant aunts and cousins started chiming in. "You really should compromise a little, Vivian," a sister-in-law texted. "Young people really need a leg up in this economy," added an uncle. The old Vivian would have spent hours drafting massive, apologetic paragraphs. She would have desperately tried to defend her side, breaking down the math of $3,500 versus $900, begging them to understand why she didn't want to hand over her sanctuary. The new Vivian opened the app, went into the group chat settings, and tapped Leave Conversation. She didn't offer a single explanation. She didn't block individual numbers. She just permanently closed the highway to her peace of mind. If anyone had the guts to confront her, they would have to call her directly and deal with her voice. Nobody did. The ensuing silence in her apartment was absolutely delicious. She strolled into the kitchen and made herself a simple dinner pan-seared halibut, roasted asparagus, and a crisp glass of white wine. She sat at her dining table, watching the Seattle skyline light up through her floor-to-ceiling windows. The apartment was hers. The furniture was hers. The choice was hers. Spencer tried to call her around midnight. He was probably hoping to catch her in a vulnerable moment, assuming late-night guilt would have eaten her alive by then. Vivian looked at his name flashing on the screen, powered the phone completely off, and set it on her nightstand. She slept like a rock, the best rest she'd had in a decade. Over the weekend, Vivian decided it was time for some deep cleaning, but definitely not to pack up and move. She walked into her second bedroom, the one Sloane had already mentally claimed for the nursery. The closet and the far corner were stacked high with heavy plastic storage bins. It was all of Spencer's old junk, his high school track trophies, busted guitars he gave up trying to learn, Sloane's bulky winter coats that wouldn't fit in their tiny closet, and boxes of heavy college textbooks. They had been sitting there collecting dust for nearly 5 years, treating Vivian's home like a free personal storage unit. If they were so eager to reclaim space, she would give them exactly what they needed. First thing Monday morning, she hired a private courier service. With the help of the movers, she hauled out 12 massive boxes, a pair of rusted skis, and 3 heavy suitcases. She filled out the shipping labels with the exact address of Spencer and Sloane's cramped $900 apartment, paying premium rates for same-day delivery by noon. She didn't slip a snarky note inside or write a dramatic farewell letter, just the boxes, sealed up tight with fresh packing tape. As the guys wheeled the last dolly out, Vivian looked around the newly emptied room. The sunlight hit the floorboards without any obstruction. She took a deep breath, already visualizing a small painting studio for herself, or maybe a cozy reading nook. The space was completely hers again, no longer a dumping ground for someone else's past, or disputed territory for their future. At exactly 1 p.m., she got an automated text from the courier. Delivery completed. Resident signed for packages. Vivian smiled, brewing herself a fresh cup of coffee. She knew exactly what the layout of that $900 apartment looked like. With 12 giant storage bins, skis, and 3 suitcases shoved into that tiny living room, they would barely have enough room to walk, let alone the bandwidth to demand more favors. At 2 p.m. sharp, the phone rang. It was Spencer. This time, Vivian picked up on the first ring. "Mom, what the hell is this?" Spencer's voice sounded muffled. In the background, Sloane was wailing. "We can't even open the bathroom door. You filled our living room with our old crap." Vivian took a slow sip of her coffee, staring out her window. "Those are your belongings. Spencer, since you're having a baby, I figured you'd want to get a head start on sorting through your things. My space is totally cleared out now." "But they don't fit in here," Spencer shouted, his entitlement completely crushed by panic. "We had to stack bins on the dining table. My credit cards are maxed out. We can't do this. If you need help going over your budget, I'm happy to sit down and teach you how to track your expenses," Vivian offered, her voice completely neutral. "But I am not funding your lifestyle anymore, and I'm absolutely not giving up my home. I don't want a finance lecture. I want you to support us." He spat back. "Support is given, Spencer, not taken by force," she replied calmly. "Call me when you're ready to talk to me like an adult." She hung up gently. The boundary was officially drawn. 4 months later, Sloane delivered a healthy baby boy, sticking firmly to her principles. Vivian didn't rush to the hospital. She waited a full 3 weeks before making a short visit to her son's apartment, bringing a top-of-the-line, ultra-compact stroller as a gift. The tension in the tiny unit was palpable. Spencer looked exhausted. The dozen boxes Vivian had shipped were nowhere in sight. They had clearly been forced to rent a storage unit and foot the bill for their own clutter. Vivian held her new grandson with genuine warmth. He was innocent in all of this. When Sloane tried to slip in a passive-aggressive remark about raising a child in a microscopic space, Vivian simply handed the baby back, grabbed her purse, and politely said her goodbyes. She didn't take the bait. Walking back into her own home, the late afternoon sun flooded her spacious, spotless living room. Her peace and quiet cost her $3,500 a month, and every single penny was worth it. She made a cup of tea and cracked open a book, fully in control of her own life. Sometimes, the hardest lesson to learn is that unconditional love does not mean giving people unconditional access to your space and resources. I used to think bending over backward was the only way to show I cared, but it just taught them to ignore my needs. Saying no was uncomfortable at first, but setting boundaries doesn't make me the villain. It makes me the protector of my own peace. My dignity has a non-negotiable price tag, and I will never again let guilt dictate how I live my life.